Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 16th of July, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. My co-host in the studio today is Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And joining us via live link, we have researcher and activist Sandi and journalist and peace campaigner Vanessa Beeley. Now, later in the programme, Vanessa is going to be talking about Tony Blair's connection to the Abraham Accords. Charles is going to be covering the situation in Darfur, which is a forgotten war mainly, and famine also, and also the ongoing drought situation here in the UK. And Sandi will be bringing us more on the devolution agenda and also the Royal Foundation. But we're going to begin today with the month of July, because July is an auspicious month for the Intelligence and Security Committee of the British Parliament. July is the month that they release their most important reports, and by important I mean propagandist. The Intelligence and Security Committee says it oversees the policies, expenditure, administration and operations of MI5, MI6, GCHQ, Defence Intelligence, the National Cyber Force, the Joint Intelligence Organisation, the National Security Secretariat, and Homeland Security Group. That's quite a security and intelligence infrastructure there, Charles.
It absolutely is.
Isn't it? Right. Anyway, why is July important? Well, if we put this on screen, July 2020, they released their report entitled Russia. In July 2023, it was China. And just a few days ago, it was Iran. Now, to get an idea of the standard of these reports, let's just remind ourselves of the Russia report. The main thrust of the report was the claim that Russia has been interfering in British democratic processes, and that as a result, social media companies needed to remove covert hostile state material from their platforms, and they said the government must name and shame those platforms that failed to act. To quote them, they said at the time, the government must now seek to establish a protocol with the social media companies to ensure that they take covert hostile state use of their platform seriously and have clear timescales within which they commit to removing such material. Now, Intelligence and Security Committee member Stuart Hosey said the committee found it astonishing that no one in government had sought beforehand to protect the referendum. That's the EU referendum that he was referring to, because Britain left the EU because of Russia, so the narrative goes. Now, the report itself went on to say open source studies have pointed to the preponderance of pro-Brexit or anti-EU stories on RT and Sputnik, and the use of bots and trolls as evidence of Russian attempts to influence the process. It went on to say the written evidence provided to us, that's the committee, appeared to suggest that Her Majesty's government had not seen or sought evidence of successful interference in UK democratic processes or any activity that's had a material impact on an election, for example, influencing results. The report also said that GCHQ has also said that Russian intelligence service actors have orchestrated phishing attempts against government departments. To take one example, there were attempts against Redacted. That's the name was redacted, so we've no idea of knowing who it was actually against, but also against, they said, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory during the early stages of the investigation into the Salisbury attacks. They also claimed that the Scottish independence referendum was a Russian target, and they cited Ben Nimmo. And of course, Ben Nimmo, if we remember, was an agent of the Integrity Initiative, which was a program to run disinformation campaigns against Russia. And that wasn't the only integrity in the report, because the report went on to say, we're grateful to those outside the intelligence community, in particular, who did they name? Anne Applebaum, Edward Lucas. Well, now, Edward Lucas, of course, always denied involvement with the Integrity Initiative, but that was patently false. William Browder, Christopher Donnelly, who ran the thing, and Christopher Steele for volunteering their very substantially. So they were thanking these people all for volunteering their very substantial expertise on Russia, which they said provided them with an invaluable foundation for the classified evidence sessions. So this was absolutely plenty of Integrity Initiative. It wasn't an Intelligence Committee report. In fact, it was an Integrity Initiative report. So coming back to the Iran report, the newest report, let's have a look and see what Lord Beamish, the current chair of the committee, had to say. He said, Iran poses a wide-ranging, persistent and unpredictable threat to the UK nationals and UK interests. Iran has a high appetite for risk when conducting offensive activity, and its intelligence services are ferociously well-resourced with significant areas of asymmetric strength. It supplements this with its use of proxy groups, including criminal networks, militant and terrorist organizations, and private cyber actors, to provide it with deniable means of attacking its adversaries with minimal risk of retaliation. We highlight in particular, he said, our concern that at the sharp increase in the physical threat posed to dissidents and other opponents of the regime who are in the UK, given Iran's willingness to use assassination as an instrument of state policy, the significant threat of Iranian espionage in support of potential future lethal activity, the importance of negotiating a form of de-escalation between Iran and the international community to deal with the Iranian nuclear threat, and the need to both raise the resilience bar and improve cybersecurity in the UK, and to raise the cost to Iran of launching cyber attacks on the UK so as to deter them from doing so. So my question then is this some grand conspiracy to take us to war? Well, in my opinion, the answer to that is yes and no. The committee claims that it sets its own agenda and work program, but to suggest that there's no steering by the intelligence agency is just not credible. And of course, they choose their experts very carefully. As they say, they take evidence from ministers, the heads of the intelligence and security agencies, senior officials, experts, and academics, as it considers necessary. So the evidence they receive is potentially highly biased. And so it's inevitable that this group of useful idiots will end up producing suitable propaganda, which then informs the media agenda, where other useful idiots unquestionably regurgitate the same propaganda. And here's a perfect example of what I mean. The Times claim that Iran poses a higher risk to our security than Russia. And if you see the highlighted quote there, it says the threat of assassination and other violence from Iran is now at the level posed by Russia, which is exactly the narrative straight out of the report itself, uncritically repeated. Charles, where do we start with this? They have a history of producing these reports, and we now have all three of the main targets of warfare that we've been hearing about for so long from the one organization.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. I think predominantly it's the note of incredible familiarity that this is the tactic deployed, and simply the name of the country is changed. But also it sets up two things. First of all, in terms of the going back to Russia, election interference, all the rest of it, it provides a smokescreen and covers or obscures the activities of the state, the British state, in terms of meddling in areas that, frankly, it shouldn't. And also, it is absolutely queuing up the possibility of a false flag, and therefore turning this into what might be regarded as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think this, it harks back to sort of 2005-6 period, where the line from the Minister of Defence was changed from dealing with matters overseas to keeping our streets safer, and that continued narrative. And you see exactly that this is the same thing happening now.
So Vanessa, lots of integrity there, but the sort of MO doesn't change. They don't really have any new way of approaching these problems.
No, absolutely not. And I would say one of the steering factors in this report is, of course, Israel and the Zionist movement lobby in the UK, which we know increasingly how powerful it is and how many sectors of British governance it's infiltrated from all directions. Quite extraordinary. I mean, they don't talk about the threat to British democracy from the state capture by Israel. And it's similar to before, when they were raising alarms about Huawei interfering with mobile phone technology in the UK, but failing to point out the Israeli infiltration of cyber surveillance, etc., in the UK. It's extraordinary, really.
And just to finish, Charles, they always do this with a straight face. How is that possible?
I don't know. We can be but continually amazed. And but the regrettable truth is that this will be absolutely absorbed and taken as fact by people who read publications like The Times. And if you cast your mind back to late 2024, when, as if reading off exactly the same script, Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and indeed Ken McCallum, Chief of MI5, were from nowhere plucking out the state threat from Iran story, and it was never substantiated, and they were never asked where they had got that specific intelligence from. And of course, that there is no evidence of any being there, but it doesn't stop them from saying it.
Indeed. Okay, well, Vanessa, let's move to Tony Blair then. Another British, well, not quite sure whether I should say any more about Tony Blair, but what have you got? Because you've discovered connections to the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Tony Blair's influence in events in the Middle East has been ongoing for decades, including, of course, most notoriously the war against Iraq, which set up the regime change war against Syria, which we've discussed many times on UK Column. But I want to start with this very short clip, which demonstrates exactly the agenda behind Tony Blair and the collective that he represents in the summer Davos in China when he's asked the following question by the interviewer.
First, for hearing your perspective on the geopolitical and geoeconomic situation. Could it have been more complicated, the geopolitical situation that we're seeing today?
Well, we'd be kind of out of business if it wasn't so.
I mean, I have to say, the interviewer also asks him about the complex situation in the Middle East. And again, he giggles. It's very hard to watch this guy now. But interestingly, yes, I did find out in the last few days that actually Tony Blair was largely responsible for setting off or initiating the Abraham Accords discussions. This is in the Jewish News, which is based in London, the London genesis of the Abraham Accords. And what does it actually say? That in 2015, in an interview in the Israeli media last weekend, it was Tony Blair who revealed that back in 2015, so this was before President Trump was elected for his first term, he first introduced Prime Minister Netanyahu's trusted consigliere, Yitzhak Molcho, to an Emirati cabinet minister in London. It then goes on to show that by the end of 2016, so that was the very beginning of Trump's first administration, the same UAE minister met Netanyahu, who was then introduced to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. 2018, Netanyahu visited Abu Dhabi twice on an Israeli flight that crossed Saudi airspace. So it does appear that Tony Blair set or created the groundwork ready for Trump's first administration that brought in the Abraham Accords through Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Blair also in the same article points out that bin Zayed, in his opinion, showed exceptional political and leadership talent, and Netanyahu is a remarkable politician, of course, conducting genocide in Gaza and the West Bank as we speak. So in 2020, basically the UAE, which was a former British protectorate, which perhaps explains Tony Blair's focus on the UAE, the Abraham Accords, unlocking sustainable and inclusive growth across the Middle East. But what does this actually mean? This is Tony Blair's statement on the actual signing, which was published up at his Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And if we actually look at what his statement said, for many years, I and my institute team have worked on deepening relationships between Israel and the Arab world. Of course, the Arab world basically means the Arab Gulf states, Jordan and Egypt. I had long come to the conclusion that if we want to see a fair resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian issue on the basis of two states, there had to be a complete reversal of the idea that the Arab world should refuse contact with Israel until a peace agreement was made. So apparently the resistance should desist, and boycotts and divestment should also not be allowed. He then goes on in published up at the Tony Blair Institute, how the Abraham Accords are shaping a new technological covenant. Now, this is where it does get slightly interesting. It's very clear that the collaboration with UAE in particular is focused very much on a digital authoritarian global dictatorship. So UAE is concentrating on becoming a front runner in more secure smart cities, driverless taxis, smart pods and eco houses, networks of sensors and camera data gathering services, and in very strong cybersecurity. All of this, of course, created in collaboration with Israel, but also with China. He then goes on to point out again in the same statement or article up at the Tony Blair Institute. So the next chapters will tell stories of the possibilities of turning the region into a global powerhouse of fintech capability through uniting Israeli tech innovation with the UAE's financial expertise. I'll leave you to translate that, leading the way in a new Abrahamic covenant for the technological area. So, of course, that means central bank, digital currency, etc. But let's have another look at the UAE that was involved in the Saudi, Israeli, US and UK war against Yemen since 2015. And in fact, I've written numerous times about the UAE black sites in southern Yemen using US-style torture against Yemeni civilians, quite horrific reports from that for at least the last 5 years. And of course, they were involved in the targeting of the Yemeni civilians in partnership with Israel and Saudi Arabia. But then also, I looked into the digital authoritarianism in the UAE and across the board. This is an article linked to Chatham House, but almost all of the Western elite-linked think tanks have written about the danger of UAE's digital authoritarianism, which includes, of course, the use of elements like the Pegasus spyware, which was developed by Israel, and the spy unit 8200, to spy on dissidents, gather information, which, of course, in the UAE then immediately leads to their arrest. There's a lot of information about this online. But the Abraham Accords, of course, then led to the Abraham Shield Plan, which, again, we've covered here on UK Column. It's a coalition basically to ensure the genocide and the extermination of Palestinians, the creation of the dystopian state that, again, we've talked about, Palestinians being confined to ever-reduced landmass concentration camps, the sale of their land or giving of their land into a trust, and then basically their displacement from Palestinian land into neighboring countries. And last week, of course, we talked about Tony Blair's staff who took part in the Gaza Riviera project with BCG. BCG, of course, is the company that was managing the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, American private military contractors who were running the humanitarian aid for Palestinians that, of course, is being used by Israel to effectively massacre more Palestinians coming into smaller and smaller areas to gather aid. And I remind everybody to have a look at the Blair Bush project in Syria that brought al-Qaeda to power, because this connects everything. So it shows very clearly that what Tony Blair is tasked with is creating a digital surveillance oppressive bloc using the Gulf countries, the Arab Gulf countries, and basically harnessing the countries that are prepared to normalize with Israel to create what I think is a very dangerous development block of all of these concepts to enslave humanity now and in the future, and of course who are deeply connected, as we've said before, to the British state, to the US and to EU states. So I want to end with another section, and I apologize for inflicting this upon all of you, but this is Tony Blair still at the summer Davos, China event, talking about his view of governance. So let's have a look at this.
You know, you do a poll in the Middle East, by the way, of young people across the whole of the Middle East and ask them, which country do you want your country to be most like? The answer is, I think, virtually every year comes back the UAE. Yeah. So, you know, this is, and that's not a coincidence, by the way. It's because of the way the governance has been. And one of the reasons why, my institute works in almost 50 countries across the world today. And one of the fascinating things is that everyone always thinks their situation is unique. And of course, in a way it is. But whichever country you go to, most of all what people want is the opportunity to do well, right, if they work hard, to have peace and stability, to raise their family with some chance of a decent future. And that's the same wherever you go. And the key to it is good governance that is open-minded itself, that is effective in providing opportunity for people and is connected to the world.
Do we have that kind of governance in the UK? I wonder. But it's also, I think, very interesting that the UAE is being set up as the flagship of this new digital totalitarianism. And the fact that the countries that are being targeted, which are effectively Iran, Syria, of course, that we know has already fallen into organized chaos, and Lebanon, or at least the Lebanese resistance, all have or had independent financial systems, independent from the World Bank, independent from Western influence and interference. We've talked about Hezbollah having the non-usury bank where people bring their gold, leave their gold for a period of time until they pay back the loan, and then they can collect their gold. Iran has independent banking. Syria had independent banking. Of course, now it's being sold by Tom Barrack, the economic hitman for Trump, into debt enslavement through the IMF, etc., and various monetary funds, just as Egypt and Jordan have been sold previously. So it's, for me, very interesting. And I think what it demonstrates very clearly is that the war is not only against the resistance in the West Asia region and in Iran, it is literally against all of us, because if Tony Blair is harnessing the Arab Gulf state to basically bring in this kind of digital tyranny, then it's certainly going to affect us. And Israel is already part of that complex and is already embedded in our own state structure.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that. Any thoughts, Charles?
I think it absolutely hits the nail on the head, Vanessa. You're quite right, and in a way, always a difficult person to talk about. He sort of seems to be everywhere, and people still seem to listen to him, which I think to anybody who's followed his career over the last 30 or 40 years could be and should be completely mystified by.
Okay, well, let's move on then to Africa and Darfur.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, that will link back to Vanessa's report rather closely. But we start with the British High Commission, who in Nairobi have been busy tweeting about increasing the exports from Africa into the UK market, with a load of footage here showing the President of Kenya, William Ruto, smiling in London with Keir Starmer, presumably because he's managed to get away from the rioting and discontent in his own country. Now, Ruto himself has used the same surveillance platform to remind the public of the, quote, areas of mutual interest between Israel and Kenya. And that links obliquely to the concurrent reporting from New York on the activities of the United Nations Security Council. Now, first of all, we have James Kariuki, the Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, who made a statement about humanitarian access to those in need in Sudan. This was back on 27th of June. He said little of note and absolutely nothing that could constitute action on the matter. But I would say his remarks are perhaps best characterised by his encouragement of others to do something. Quote, we welcome continued efforts by the UN, the African Union and countries of the region to advance an inclusive political process. And then on Thursday, 10th of July, the council met to discuss the situation in Darfur. And this was prompted by a report from the deputy prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Nazat Khan. Now, before considering what it is that she did say, I should just point out the remit of the ICC, as shown here on the banner at the top of their website, says trying individuals for genocide, war crime, crimes against humanity, and aggression. Now, she was keen to begin by thanking the president of Sudan for attending, a point of significance which I'll come back to. Khan's opening gambit was to state that, quote, the humanitarian position has reached an intolerable state, which makes it significant that her statement, which was nearly 2,000 words long. She did not mention a single date. Now, the reference to the humanitarian position could describe any point over the last several decades, making this just another demonstration of the international community's sustained ability to preserve and protect vested interests while talking as though something will happen. And to pick out an example with which to illustrate the point, Nazat Khan said, quote, "And I wish to be clear on a key priority in this respect. We must work together with seriousness and focus to secure the arrest of those individuals subject to ICC arrest warrants presently in Sudan. Omar Hassan Ahmad al-Bashir, Ahmad Harun, and Abdel Rahim Mohammed Hussein." Now, she's referring here to a process which has already been going on for 20 years, and still no sanctions have been brought against any of those three men. UK Column has covered the extraordinarily ineffectual record of the ICC, and I refer back to Khan's opening remarks about Sudan's president, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. In 2008, when delivering a similar report, the then ICC prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, said, quote, "My office has a duty not to intervene when national authorities are conducting national proceedings. This is the principle of complementarity. The Sudan claimed that it would investigate and prosecute perpetrators of crimes." Well, obviously it did not. Now, as to whether there is any sincere desire for or expectation of change, this clip examines the effectiveness of the UN set alongside the remarks of Kieran Prendergast, the former Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the UN, as recorded for a PBS Frontline documentary from 2007.
At the summit, world leaders toasted a final agreement that covered a great deal of ground. Within it was a section on the responsibility to protect. It was an endorsement of an emerging legal norm that gave the UN authority to intervene and, if necessary, even invade a country to protect the civilian population. It seemed to offer hope. But once again, principles the UN put on paper would not translate into concrete action to save the people of Darfur. Veteran UN officials were candid in their skepticism.
We don't mean it when we say that we're not going to accept other Rwandas, further Rwandas, but I never thought we did mean it. And it's a very sad conclusion, but I don't think there's any evidence to sustain the view that we did mean it. We may have meant it at a kind of, at a level of generalized indignation, but when it comes to accepting the consequences of that, we don't.
Prendergast there, I think, telling you really everything you need to know. And of course, it should be pointed out that UNAMID, the UN mission to Darfur, was shut down in 2020, and there's none running there currently. Now, of course, given the very short memory that the public is permitted to have by the mainstream media and the various national and supranational governments of the world, it's no surprise to see follow-up statements such as that from Colin McIntyre, the ICC, in response to the ICC report. McIntyre said that he was, quote, gravely concerned and that there are reasonable grounds to believe that war crimes and crimes against humanity may have been committed and indeed are continuing to be committed in Darfur. He even tried to turn the failed arrests of the three men as a warning to perpetrators who still believe themselves beyond the reach of international law, when of course it is quite the opposite. Now, as to why and how this situation is allowed to perpetuate, there is of course not enough time in this report to go into sufficient detail, but the activities of the government of the United Arab Emirates, as Vanessa has just been articulating, should be scrutinised to a much greater degree. And under the auspices of humanitarian aid from neighbouring Chad, UAE has been accused of supplying weapons to the Rapid Support Force, RSF, the latest incarnation of the Janjaweed militia, for the continued conflict in Darfur, as referenced by this Guardian article from April. Certainly, the UAE is the largest purchaser of Sudanese gold, as shown here by the OEC's statistics from 2023, making them the largest single contributor to the Sudanese economy and therefore have a huge amount of influence. The UAE has made no secret of its plan to control an enormous number of deep water ports all over the world via the state-controlled DP World. And as reported by UK Column, the UK itself is partnered by DP World via British international investment, most notably at the controversial port of Berbera in Somaliland. And moving on to this piece in the Cradle, which describes this as a covert empire across the Red Sea. It's certainly worth reading, and there'll be a link to it in the show notes. Now, the other factor deserving equal consideration, though it's most certainly not exclusive to the UAE, is the outsourcing of agriculture to Sudan. And here we have Grain, a non-profit, which has examined this, reckoning that UAE now controls more than 1 million hectares of Sudanese farmland during what is described as a famine in Sudan by the United Nations. And perhaps most critically, the UAE is seen as a key strategic partner in the alliance against Iran, most notably, as Vanessa's just been describing, via the Abraham Accords, and indeed her relationship with Israel. So, UAE rather than Vanessa. It is an enduring and complex picture, and one that strongly suggests that none of the actors involved have any interest in improving. Now, I don't know if we've got time to have a few thoughts from Vanessa on that situation, but perhaps particularly the role of UAE in Sudan's, degenerate state of affairs.
Well, I mean, it's just horrific, but I think what is equally scary is the clear involvement. I mean, I haven't checked on the Tony Blair Institute of the connections to Sudan, but I'm sure they will be there because Tony Blair is clearly partnering with the UAE in this Israel-linked expansionist project. And of course, it's all related to water, largely for Israel in particular, and UAE that don't have access to water resources at all.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. Tony Blair, as we've mentioned many times in this program, is interested in the whole Sahel region, which is that whole region south of the Sahara Desert. So I think he's absolutely active in the area. If you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, the link to do that is on the front page of the UK Column website. Click on there and you'll find all the options. Thank you very much to everybody that is helping us out financially. If you can't do that, then please do share anything you see on the UK Column website that takes your fancy. Now let's have a look at this. Fact-checking the fact censors. This was Diane's discussion with Dr. Judith Brown. Went out at 1 p.m. yesterday. It's now available on demand on the website. Please do watch that if you haven't seen it. Judith knows what she's talking about, and it's another hugely interesting conversation. Tonight, Jerome will be asking the question, do we really have free will, with Todd Hyan. So that's at 7 p.m. in the usual live stream places, ukcolumn.org/live, and so on. And tomorrow at 1 p.m., Joy Warren is the guest.
So, her third interview with the UK Column, talking about the massive concern around fluoridation of water by water companies and the effectively indiscriminate medication of the population by doing it.
On demand, on location, UK Column on location. Saturday, the 18th of October, 2025 in New York. Tickets go on sale on the 20th of July. We're looking forward to it, Charles.
Yeah, we are. We're very much looking forward to it. And there will be tickets available for both the in-person event and indeed the live stream from the 28th of July. So we'll be announcing speakers very soon.
And this weekend, then, the Thetford Truth and Freedom Festival taking place in the Angel Hills in Swallow Lane in Larling. And Diane will be speaking at that. So get along to that if you possibly can. And the question of devolution, Sandi, which we're about to talk about, you're going to be speaking on this on Sunday.
Yes, I am indeed. The distance meeting in the southwest at Goffinland in Devon, in Exeter. I think Andrew Bridgen's speaking as well. I don't know what he's speaking on, but he usually pulls it out of a hat. And I'm just going to be really focusing on devolution because it is really something that I'll be speaking about later, and so will you. And it's a really important topic because it is all about our democracy, or lack of at the moment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandi. And speaking of Andrew Bridgen, he will be speaking in the Seven Stars Hotel in Totnes on Friday, the 25th of July. Patrick Henningsen will be introducing that, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards. The details for all these events will be in the show notes, so have a look at the today's news program on the UK Column website for more on these things. Now let's then come straight on to the question of devolution. And the fantastic news that Plymouth is going to hold a referendum tomorrow on the issue of whether or not to have a directly elected mayor. And as is typical for Plymouth, this is a very stupid thing to do, because no matter the outcome, there won't be a directly elected mayor. And this is because 3 weeks ago, the Starmer regime announced that metro mayors are the only way to go. So there will be no city mayors. So the outcome of this referendum makes no difference. Now, the most widely recognised metro mayors are, of course, Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, but there are quite a number of so-called regions which have elected mayors now. According to the Institute for Government, regional mayors are directly elected leaders who chair mayoral strategic authorities, brackets also known as combined authorities, to which specified functions and budgets have been devolved from Whitehall. Mayoral strategic authorities are formed by a group of local authorities at a city, regional or regional level, as the Institute for Government says. And they go on to say that the specifics of the powers of MSAs vary from place to place, but typically include aspects of transport, skills, housing and local infrastructure investment, and in some cases, spatial planning, policing, health and employment support. Now, the government's devolution bill will establish a 3-tier devolution framework, they say, that applies by default to all places, bringing greater consistency of what is devolved each MSA. Now, what they're talking about there is the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, which Sandi's going to talk about in a second, introduced a few days ago by Angela Rayner, and which Ben spoke about on Monday's programme, and which will bring centralised control to the local level. But as we've been highlighting this for years in article after article, these people are about as democratic as Stalin, and just lots of articles on this topic. So, Sandi, let's hear more from you on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my first slide is really from it's saying, are these mayors, are they going to fix our regions? Well, no, I don't think they are. They're going to fix it for themselves, surely, and for global governance, but they're not going to fix it for the people of the UK. And the thing is that this is, this is a kind of problem, reaction, solution thing, because the regions, if you want to call them the regions, the UK has been hollowed out from inside out. The infrastructure's been decimated, and so they're coming in, they're flying in as the saviors, and it's the same thing. It's problem, reaction, solution, and really it's the remedy to bring in the full technocratic control agenda. And this isn't by anything, all of this is verifiable, because it all feeds into the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals run by obviously by the UN and the WEF. So do we really want, that kind of fascism, actually? And the thing is that what we have to remember is that this new bill that we've got coming in is really about. I'm just going to go. Actually, the next slide is about a short recent history of devolution. I'll just go into that first, because it's been a long-term plan, and I think people have to realise that this is really a long-term plan from 1988, I believe. And then, Tony Blair really tried to push it in the early 2000s, and it was voted out in 2004. And then in 2016, the biggest shift was the Communities and Cities and Communities Act that came in 2016, and that kind of laid the pathway really for what we're finding now with the devolution white paper is the next thing that came up. And then, of course, we've now got this Cities and Communities Empowerment Act. But the thing is that it is not going to empower the people. It's going to empower the agenda, and that's the problem. Because under this act, mayors gain really control over transport. We're talking about the smart city mayors or the metro mayors, whatever you want to call them. The shift, the power shift, is coming away from Westminster to these people that haven't really been elected by us, and they're being put in positions of ultimate power. They're being given the power over transport, housing and planning, net zero infrastructure, energy systems, economic development, skills and innovation, and police and crime commissioning and fire services in some cases. So this is really quite, I mean, it's really worrying, in as much as these mayors, their sole aim is to hit the net zero targets. So they don't really care what you think. They want to hit their net zero targets. And as we've seen with Andy Burnham in Manchester, he's completely changed the whole transport system there. And he's got all the electric buses and cycle lanes. And it is turning into a smart city in every single way. And what we need to realise is that also the system is changing from government policy. The biggest takeaway from this bill is that the system is changing from government policy to global framework, really. And so these global frameworks are all integrated with Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And so we've just got to realise that everything is influenced. You've got local authorities under these global covenant of mayors, and the global covenant of mayors is part of the C40 cities plan, and the C40 cities plan is it's a leadership group of global network of about 100 major cities committed to addressing climate change and advancing the goals of the UN Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. It was founded in 2005, so it's come from quite a way back, and it brings together both mayors and city leaders to collaborate on cutting urban carbon emissions and promoting sustainability and implementing net zero policies across transportation, energy, buildings and waste systems. It's heavily backed by the global institutions like the Bloomberg Philanthropies, World Bank, ICLEI, which is the International Committee for Local and Environmental Initiatives, that was brought in from Agenda 21 into every town council in the UK. And it works closely with the World Economic Forum and the UN bodies. The C40 Cities pledge is to implement policies that align with global climate targets, often pushing beyond national governments in ambition. You see, critics argue that it bypasses democratic accountability, and I think it does. It's really giving unelected global actors the influence over our policies, and promotes a technocratic control under the guise of climate action. And so the climate thing is the biggest thing, because as we know, there are plans for climate lockdowns. We've got plans for, our cities are heavily surveilled. We've got geofencing in place. This could actually become a real worry. And the fact that we're bypassing Parliament is being the powers of Parliament are being literally shifted over to these global mayors. So I really feel that we've got to somehow understand that the way things are going, our democracy is being further eroded, because at least at the moment, I know our town councils, some of them are pretty bad. Our Parliament is bad, but at least at the moment we can change things. Once these guys get in, we can't. We don't have any choice. They will just do what they want. And at the moment, with the C40 cities, I'm thinking about the farmers. You've got. Can I go back to the last slide, please? Which was you've got think tanks like the London University, and they're looking at food and how food could be sort of woven into devolution. And then on the next slide, please, we've got the planetary diet that was put forward by the C40 cities. And really the planetary diet is about cutting out meat from your diet. And so they want to just control every aspect of our lives. And if we look at that, obviously Mike put this slide up. This is this is how devolution is progressing throughout the UK. Then mainly the devolved areas are up north. And what you'll find is in your local council, you might be, first of all, going unitary, which is you join up with another couple of councils. And then it goes into a combined authority, which is slightly bigger. And then after that, they want you to go regional. Now, I'm looking here at Tony Blair's regional federal map of what he wanted the federal map to look like by 2020. And he produced this in the early 2000s. So more and more, Tony Blair's idea of how we should be is playing out now. And that's what I'm seeing. And unfortunately, you know, the way things are going, we've got these mayors that they're using this as a way for bringing in global control, and we don't have a say at the moment, and we need to. So that's kind of it.
Thank you, Sandi. Thank you. Charles, let's, sticking in the UK, move on to the question of drought.
Yes, I mean, all these things are, of course, related, but we're now in a situation where we have more warm weather, more hosepipe bans, more finger-pointing, and more climate alarmism. It must be summer, and the Environment Agency, which behaves as though it has assumed overall responsibility for all water within the United Kingdom, has announced another meeting of the National Drought Group. Their plan, it would appear, is to ask everyone to use less water, but their ability to either influence or monitor this is seriously compromised. Now, just like farmers and other businesses, water companies are theoretically limited by their abstraction license as to the amount of water they can take from natural supplies, and this is controlled by the Environment Agency. As we know, all water companies have an appalling and well-recognised track record of wasting water through leakage, something which is never properly addressed and results, as now, in farmers and members of the public being blamed for the imagined or predicted shortages. Now, the National Framework for Water Resources, published recently, makes many references to the forthcoming deficit and to all the various and competing demands on the water supply. What they most certainly do not do is make any suggestion that there should be a hierarchy of priorities when it comes to what they describe as an increasingly scarce resource. There are many references to the burgeoning thirst of data centres and artificial intelligence hubs, but a consistent failure to attach any figures to this requirement. The framework does suggest, somewhat hopefully, that data centres should look to other supplies of water beyond using public water supply, for example, using recycled water. I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in order to establish the current and projected consumption of both water and electricity where AI and data centres were concerned. The reply was underwhelming, though predictable. They have no idea, as they do not keep records, and strangely, they do not use modelling to guess what will happen next. Also claiming not to use modelling is the annual State of the UK Climate Report 2024, published on Monday, so for the year in retrospect. This is written by the Met Office and the Royal Meteorological Society, merely a lengthy reminder that, according to their very obviously manipulated statistics and records, that the country is getting warmer and drier and wetter, but not windier, though, which may present a problem for the storm-loving weather forecasters in the mainstream. The other key assertion is that the sea level is rising, and of course, all of this is written with two things in mind. Firstly, it's your fault, and secondly, it is all dangerous. Now, though the report is explicit in stating that it should not be used to predict the future, that is precisely what Liz Bentley, the chief executive of the Royal Meteorological Society, has done in her interview about the report with the BBC, but no challenge was issued by the BBC when she did so. Concurrent with the doom-mongering has been the belief that this year's harvest will be a disaster, which of course provides the perfect nudge into consuming lab-grown indigestibles. It's too early to give much of an indication, but Farmers Weekly suggests that the wheat harvest so far is actually better than expected. And on a related note, you may recall that back in April, UK Column reported on what appeared to be an ill-considered encouragement to farmers to withhold milling wheat in order to create a bread shortage, so that the public would be made aware that the government is not looking after farmers. Now, this initiative pushed by Ollie Harrison and Clive Beeley does not appear to have taken market forces into account. And the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board was already predicting back then that there would be a 13% increase in wheat imports for this year. And that was as far back as March. Agri-Trade News, we've just seen on screen, suggesting that this strike made absolutely no difference, although there may have been some unintended and negative consequences for any farmers who were convinced to take this sort of action. So imagining that the government will ever have farmers' interests at heart is made to look like a fool's errand. And anyone listening who does produce food, please do go to the farming section on the UK Column website for inspiration in terms of establishing local markets. Finally, the bill which absolutely refuses to die. There would be a strong chance that the era of global boiling will have petered out by the time the Climate and Nature Bill is debated again in Parliament, and its second reading, already pushed back to the 11th of July this year, has now been further deferred to Friday the 29th of May 2026.
That's a shame.
Well, yes, I suppose it depends which way you look at it.
Okay, back to Sandi then. And Sandi, tell us about the Royal Foundation.
Well, it's really part of the Royal Foundation is a mixture of obviously William and Kate getting together, and he's kind of doing the conservation and the Earthshot thing, and she seems to have taken a very keen interest in early years development for children, and she set up the Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood, and I think I've got a video here of her and how she's what she's doing. So listen to this, and we'll go on from there.
Earlier this year, we asked you 5 big questions about raising our under 5s. We wanted to hear what you think about the importance of the earliest years of our children's lives. More than 500,000 of you answered that call. So we've taken your input and combined it with even more public research to produce the UK's biggest ever study on the early years. This year has been a hugely challenging time for us all, and there hasn't been a more important moment to talk about families. Later on this week, we'll share 5 big insights that we've discovered, and I will take your questions. This is just the beginning, and I want to thank you for starting a conversation, because we're all on this journey together.
Right. Well, it's interesting. She's the foundation have teamed up with the Lego Foundation, Unilever, and there's NatWest and Ernst & Young, and Deloitte. And these big corporations are heavily invested in early child development. Now, I wonder why. And we can see now that because of the AI in schools now, they can monitor those children's outcomes. And as we know, outcomes for children are being sold, to third parties on the blockchain and sort of like almost like betted as futures. And there's children are being commodified in school. And these early years things is really quite, I find it really concerning because, this is there is another video, but it was too long to put on. But can I have that slide back? Yeah, this slide. It shows you that it's all about feelings and empathy and understanding each other and working alongside each other and collaborating and being in children being in community, and how all of their feelings and everything are very important. Well, of course they are, because they are monitoring them with SEL learning, which is social and emotional learning, through the devices in their schools. And all this information is being sold on to third parties. It's being harvested and used as a commodity. And unfortunately, children, they're saying that, the teachers are going along with this because they're saying, oh, well, isn't it great that the children are understanding their own feelings, their own emotions, their own empathy, the way they deal with their emotions. But all of that is being filtered to use, and it could be that they're using them because they're trying to work out which ones are neurodiverse, which ones aren't, because money can be made on children either way, whatever their cases are. So the Lego group I found quite weird, really. Well, not weird, but they're very close to the WHO and UNICEF. They're working in conjunction with them, and they've got Play Futures labs. And they've got global ties with they're an advocate of the SDG 4. They're aligned with globalist reform initiatives, and they've on their website they've got policies, and it all aligns with the WEF and the whole agenda. And what I thought was really strange is in the next slide they actually have a policy of snitching in their corporation, that if you find somebody that is not actually going along with their narrative, then you can snitch them and get them the sack, which I thought was quite interesting. So all of this is aligned to a bigger picture of data harvesting children in the early years, which is really, really, it's technocratic framing of childhood. The centre promotes the idea that early childhood, birth to age 5, is not just a family or community matter. So they're taking the responsibility from the families and the parents because it really is a national investment issue, they say. While supported by neuroscience, this language is also a gateway to literally sort of reading children's emotions and framing them into this kind of data set that they can use really for making money. So it mirrors a broader global strategy to frame human beings as assets to be optimized, really. Certainly with Sustainable Development 3. Now I've got an SEL learning video, so we can put that up, and you can understand what SEL learning is.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults.
Yeah, the adults. So it just shows you that this supports long-term psychological compliance, really. They want the perfect global citizens, and it all aligns with the ESG values, and it takes the responsibility of the parents away, and I think it's a form of child abuse, actually, but that's probably going a bit far, but I don't think so.
Any thoughts?
The outsourcing of everything, where does it end? It's totally absurd.
We have a final video clip. Charles, why don't you introduce it?
We do. We've taken a bit of a battering from the climate change narrative today. So to lighten the mood, we're going to cast our eye back to a Fast Show sketch from, I think, 2011, where they imagined the weather forecast in foreign in the days when you could still laugh about stuff.
Necketeros, fossotipia fiteros, weekend meteorologicos met Paula.
Hello, clásicos de paratos meteorologi a vale portos. Scorchio. Mini cunhatera interior. Scorchio. Mini cunhatera exterior. Scorchio. Monte Blanco. Scorchio. Costa. Scorchio. Meteorologicus mañana. Oh, Scorchio.
Scorchio.
There we go. Seems they knew what was coming.
Sadly, they haven't looked out the window here, so we're not quite so scorchio today.
Not today.
But anyway, we've got to leave it there for today. Thank you very much, Sandi and Vanessa, for joining us, and Charles, of course, and everybody that's watched. If you're a UK Column member, stick around on the live stream, and we will be back for some UK Column News Extra in a few minutes' time. Otherwise, don't forget Jerem tonight, the interview tomorrow, and we'll be back 1 p.m. as usual on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.